Hi, everybody. My name is Kayley Pingeon. I will be talking about how we understand food sovereignty and ways to improve and enhance Indigenous traditional food access on state-managed lands. First, we will go into the background. So Native people have carefully managed and cultivated the land that we know as Washington and all over the United States for thousands of years. Indigenous practices with traditional ecological knowledge, with things like controlled burning, is how we know our natural environments today. Imposed development, including deforestation, mining, and drilling, pose obstacles to food sovereignty and overlook the historical cultivation of natural environments. It's also really important to remember that settler colonialism undermines Indigenous peoples' politics and cultural sovereignty through historical forced removal and restricted access to ancestral lands and traditional sites, which is oftentimes on state lands. Western science also has rejection of Indigenous worldviews that perpetuates marginalization, and it also erodes Indigenous peoples' politics and cultural sovereignty. So what exactly is food sovereignty? It's the ability of communities to determine the quantity and quality of the food they consume by controlling how their food is produced and distributed. You can see in figure 1 a serviceberry grove, and I was able to visit an ancient Indigenous forest garden during my time, during my internship. So my research questions were, how do the Washington's 29 federally recognized tribes increase traditional food access within their own communities? And what state agencies can do to contribute to engaging more productively and honestly in regards to traditional food sovereignty? I worked with the Department of Natural Resources, looking at ways that state agencies can improve traditional food access. I did this through literature reviews, looking at inequities of food sovereignty and current traditional food management practices. I also collected data on the 29 federally recognized tribes on their food sovereignty advances, and I sourced these from tribal and state websites. I also did interviews with policy, traditional food, archaeologists, and GIS experts to better understand this issue. And that was the figure 1 that I had showed you guys, the picture of the Indigenous food garden at the Serviceberry was one of those interviews and times that I was able to have. Next, we'll go into the results. So by taking leadership from tribes and providing state agency staff with educational opportunities to understand food sovereignty and the significance in traditional foods, it inevitably will improve access on state lands. We can lean into traditional food sovereignty education and use programs that are already that have already been established by many of the recognized tribes within Washington. So in figure 2, you can see that 24% of the 29 federally recognized tribes offer traditional food classes, 13% have food symposiums or reports, 34% of them have language programs, and 30% have community gardens. So by adopting traditional food programs within state agencies, attending these tribal food symposiums, and donating to tribal food sovereignty movements, we are also supporting and cultivating improved traditional food access. Restoration is also another aspect that we can look at, because on state agencies that are working with natural resources, a lot of them are already doing a lot of restoration work that directly contributes to food sovereignty movements. So adopting tribal restoration initiatives and taking leadership from local tribes on restoration management practices, and by including traditional ecological knowledge into our heavily Western science-based management practices, will also aid in improving traditional food access. You can see in figure 3 the different tribal restoration initiatives within the 29 federally recognized tribes and what state agencies can lean into. Some of the takeaways: so non-Indigenous systems and institutions must yield authority, time, and resources, and be aware that they need to deconstruct their own colonial postures toward tribal nations. When we look at the broader significance of this, I have been looking at cultural values and nutritional values. Lavonna Wilkins from the Yakama Nation said, "Our people never claimed ownership, never. We didn't own this land, the Creator did. We didn't own this water, the Creator gave it to us for life. We didn't own the animals, they made their own decisions, and we have all the stories that tell it. And we, the trees, everything we used for our own, but we also gave thanks and prayer for everything that we took from Mother Earth. Everything has meaning, everything has very deep meaning, our spiritual way of life." So when we look at cultural values, understanding that harvesting traditional foods is one of the main links that Indigenous people have to the land, and it's a main way to transfer skills and maintain those cultural values. You can see in Figure 4, the show of the Puyallup tribe's first salmon ceremony, and most tribes in Washington have a first salmon ceremony every single year. It's also important to remember the nutritional values. So there is limited access to healthy, affordable foods in many rural Indigenous communities. Food deserts can be found in rural areas where supermarkets or grocery stores are scarce, which also directly contributes to food insecurities. And many of these areas are surrounded by state-managed lands. A lot of them are forestry lands. And so understanding how we can incorporate traditional foods into modern resource management practices and include traditional ecological into these practices, the better off we are. I would like to thank Max Showalter, Courtney Higgins, Mo Major, and Charlotte Cote for helping me and supporting me with my research. Also to my friends and family for all the patience and love and sacrifice that has gone into all my years of being in education. I also would really like to thank tribal communities who have continued to fight for food sovereignty and sustainability for everybody. Does anybody have any questions?